Thank you for inviting me to Denmark. First of all, I'm sorry I can't speak to you in Danish, but after listening this morning, your English is definitely a lot better than my Danish. So sorry about that, but hopefully I'll take you through today a little bit about what we do and the farm. So my name's Clive Bailye. I'm from Lichfield in Staffordshire, it's right in the centre of the UK. Birmingham is our nearest big city. We're a large arable farm, all combinable crops. Our soils are generally light, low clay contents, but we have a bit of everything. So we have some sandy loams and some heavy clays, so quite a range of soils. We've been zero-till, min-till conservation ag, regen ag, whatever you want to call it, for kind of 15 years now on our longest land, and we have some that's been in 3-4 years, new estates as we've taken on extra land through that time. So what I want to do is, I'll take you back to the start really. Yeah, so this is where I was. Can I play? Back on you. Play. Yeah, so kind of back to the start. This is back in like 2006, 2007. I've been back from college for 10 years and built kind of a large arable business from a small dairy farm that I'd kind of come back from university to. And this is the kind of machinery we were using. We were minimum tillage, but I'm not sure there's much minimum, about 600 horsepower. So using kind of cultivation trains, followed by cultivator drills like Hardestad Rapid, that kind of system. And it was working. We were growing decent crops, everything looked great, we were busy. But there was a bit of an underlying problem that we weren't really making any money. At the end of the year, all we had to show for it was the subsidy check, which we could have had without all the hassle and risk of running all that machinery and risking the weather. So I kind of started to think, what we were doing wasn't quite right. And this is where we've got to last year. Oh, I took the sound down, sorry. So this is us drilling our winter beans at the end of October, this 2019. Early November, end of October I think it was, into a cover crop using a tractor that's a third of the horsepower of the one in the first slide, with a drill that is twice as wide, now 12 metres. The cover crop went in straight after a wheat crop, and it's the beans following in, and that's more like we kind of farm today. So how we got there really. Ja, kom through that show. There's not time for it all anyway.
Vi har lovet oversættelser, så snakker han så hurtigt.
Nej. Ja.
Filmene. Det var kun fra 5% læger op til 30%. Jeg ramte lidt forkert. Stor far. Kom hjem fra college 2006. Og overtog det der, som havde været en mindre kvægbedrift, som blev meget stor, som man ser i en af de meget store maskiner og 600 hestekræfter. Nu, over i det med så grønt, som vi så, som han introducerer mere. Tredjedel hestekræfter, godt 200 hestekræfter, og dobbelt så stor en vores avatar, som vi præsenterer senere. Og så.
Okay, so how I kind of arrived at that. So what I started to look at, I kind of deconstructed what we did as farmers and came back to this, the basics of what we all do. We all use water and sunlight and air and turn it into carbon. And that carbon is what we sell. Whether we're livestock farmers or arable farmers, we're creating carbon in a form we can sell. So ultimately, if we want to sell more carbon, we need to capture more of the ingredients that make that. Water, sunlight and air. But my conclusion on my lighter soils, I came to the conclusion looking at yield maps that what was limiting us was the water part of this. So it was all about how can I use water better and therefore I'll have more ingredients, make a bigger cake and I can therefore sell more carbon. But the UK is not famous for being dry. It's a pretty wet country, particularly this year. And you look at other regions where wheat are growing, North America, Australia, South America, they deal with much more extremes of dry climate. So they were the countries that I went and visited to learn how farmers coped and used their water better. And the one thing they all had in common was they wouldn't consider cultivation. Tillage was potentially, in a very dry climate, would mean that they wouldn't have a harvest. So I came back from these travels and reading bits and pieces and use of the internet and whatever, and kind of came to the conclusion, actually, if I wanted to improve my yields, I needed to stop cultivating. And that was the beginning of that kind of no-till journey. Now, at the time I ignored the third ingredient there, air, really, because I thought that was a constant. There wasn't much I could do about getting more air, and there still isn't much. But I think an opportunity that's present to all of us today and will evolve over the next decade is the part of that air that we use is the carbon dioxide. The part that a lot of the society now wants us to remove from the air or reduce in the air. So I think this is quite an exciting time in farming, in that if we can do more to pull this carbon dioxide and carbon out of the air, we can solve the problems that will keep this generation a little bit happier and stop them having tantrums about things. So, but I think this is an opportunity. It will be, I don't see myself in the future as just a producer of food. I think I will have a second product to sell, which will be environmental sustainability that the likes of British Airways may want to pay me to offset, or however they're going to kind of keep their shareholders happy.
Så starten, ja. De tre komponenter. Troede mest, det var vand, der var den begrænsende faktor. Studerede, eller havde kontakter til meget tørre lande, hvor vand burde være et endnu større problem, og det var der no-till kom ind i billedet. Det er løsningen på vandproblemet. Luft, tænker Clive, det er bare noget, der er der. Og dog så er det vi skal sælge i fremtiden, det er luften, koldioxid i luften, som skal ind i planterne. Og det er selvfølgelig fotosyntese, vi skal have de her tre produkter til at fungere, og vi skal optimere den proces. Så de her tre komponenter skal alle sammen optimeres. Ja.
Okay, so this is the system that we adopted: conservation agriculture, regenerative agriculture, no tillage, sustainable agriculture. Call it whatever you like. Conservation agriculture is the best title. But these are the three principles: minimum soil disturbance, permanent soil organic matter cover, and species maximum diversity of species, so through cover crops and all these things. So this is the farming system that we're more familiar with today, but 15 years ago seemed like I was trying to fly to the moon. Today it seems a lot more comfortable and familiar to us all. Also, I was becoming increasingly aware that we were very dependent on these things, bags and bottles. They were almost like the drugs for our soil, and like all drugs, the more we took them, the less effective they seemed to be. Now, I don't farm without them. I'm not an organic farmer. I still use synthetic nitrogen, and I still use ag chemicals where there is a margin over input cost that will pay me back. They're not demons. Three out of 5 of us in this room today are only alive because of the invention of synthetic nitrogen. It has saved more lives than any other invention that mankind has ever made. So, you know, I'm not trying to be organic here. I still use these products, and if you want to explain
Yes. What was the den sidste, det var jo det her med conservation agriculture, det har jeg hørt mange gange, men for 15 år siden, der var det ikke bare noget, der kom af sig selv. Det var ikke bare noget, man slår op i landbrugsavisen næste, hvad conservation agriculture var. Og det her, jamen det er, jorden bliver afhængig af de her stoffer, og landmænd bliver måske også stående hen ad vejen, bare fordi de var bare tilgængelige. Først har vi gødning, der får planten til at gro, og så har vi kemien, der kan få den sundet igen, fordi de ikke var for sunde af alt det gødning, de har fået. Han er ikke afhængig af det her. Jorden bliver afhængig af det, tror han. Men det er ikke fordi, han fraskriver de her ting, men man skal bare tænke på, at det ikke kun godt, det der er i de sækker og flasker.
So and just on the environmental side though, Yarra are Europe's largest buyer of industrial gas. So if we are going to solve some of these climate issues, we're going to have to reduce our dependency on these things. Otherwise, for every bit of carbon we sequester, we're just using it at the other end of our system. So
alt det energi, der bliver brugt til at producere gødning, det er helt enormt. Det er en af de store belastninger på vores klimaregnskab.
So we as farmers, we always can find things to moan about. You know, many problems, grass weeds, slugs, aphids, the weather. We're great at moaning about things, but I think some of these problems, as we all see them, are actually symptoms of the problem. And the real problem is that soil health is declining. And as soil health declines, the problems become more obvious to see. So there's no point treating symptoms. If you want to fix a problem, you fix the problem. So it's all been, from this moment for me forward, about improving my soil health, and then as a result I see a lot of these symptoms disappear.
Så vi skal have tankegangen lidt væk fra, hvor vi skal have noget nyt, der skal bekæmpe det der er problem. Vi skal finde tilbage til, hvad var årsagen til problemet. Og det er så den, der står med rødt ned os. Ja. Så jeg tror, de andre kan godt forstå.
Margin, the finances, the other great thing about the system is I'm doing less, so my fixed cost structure can become a lot lower. And that ultimately leads me to a much more profitable business. I think there's always been farmers, we put a bit too much emphasis on variable costs, which fertiliser, which fungicide, which tractor, which drip, whatever, where we should really, the big savings are the fixed costs. If we can get away from, in my case, those big 600 horsepower tractors and start using tractors a third of the size, if instead of 9 or 10 people working for me, I can get away with 2 or 3 people working for me, they are the big savings that kind of make my business more profitable by saving from them.
Det er ikke gødning, vi lige har ændret de store penge på i første omgang. Det går på mange ting på de detaljer, men det er grundlæggende alt det, du har købt ind i maskinhuset, traktor, alt for store traktorer og for mange ansatte.
And this was the target I set myself, which was £200 per hectare, which is about a third of the UK average. So that was where I was aiming.
Så han satte sig på en tredjedel af standarden i England.
But of course, I didn't want to reduce my output. So this isn't a system that, okay, I could be much cheaper, but I'm going to have a lot less to sell, so I'm no better off. My aim was to at least maintain my yields and ideally improve them through the better use of water. So this shows my yields, my rolling average back from 2005 to 12, and now 2012 to 2017. It's showing a slight increase, but really the increase is not really relevant. The point of the slide is to prove that my yields haven't dropped. This is all milling wheat, we go all 100% milling wheats, and there can be other reasons, weather, better fungicides, better varieties, but overall we are still growing as good a crop as we can, and for my area these are good averages.
Gode udbytter, og de er ikke faldet. En tendens til stigning, det kan have mange årsager, men det er ikke faldet i udbytte.
But also having less money tied up in machinery, less people on my payroll, is a financial risk reduction. So I've got less money tied up in my farming business, which means either lower finance burden, or if I'm in a cash position, I can invest money into other areas. So I'm less dependent on farming alone then. Same with my labour, in a year like this where it's been hard to get crops into the ground in wet conditions. I've not got dozens of men all needing paying, I've only got a couple that all need paying. So risk reduction has been improved. The time that we have to get jobs done has been much longer because we've just got less to do, even though we're covering a large area.
Risikoen er mindre, der er kun 2 mænd, der skal have løn i stedet for 5 i et skidt efterår, hvor det ikke rigtig kan laves noget arbejde. Så man har bare bundet meget mindre kapital, og man kan lave andre ting med de penge, man ikke har brugt på det her.
But that reduction in risk takes other forms as well. So reduction to with weather risks. We live in a world where seemingly extremes of weather seem to be increasingly common. Recently, it's been the extreme wet weather that we've had. But this is back in 2018, at grain fill, when the crops were just starting to ripen. I had a drone for my birthday and I put it up above on the edge of our farm. The picture on that side is looking across some of our wheat. And although it's been very dry, no rain for 6 weeks, it's still looking quite green and coping. I then turned the drone around to 180 degrees, and this is looking over my neighbour's farm at the same time, quite cheekily. And you can see the patches wherever there's lighter soil, he's not using the water so well, it's starting to die off. And it's going to ripen quicker for an early harvest, but he's losing yield. Every day longer I can keep that crop green, and fill grain is 0.2 of a tonne a hectare, I'm told by experts. So a week longer is perhaps an extra tonne to the hectare. So it's kind of showing me that we're using that water better. Now, there are other factors. I mean, he grows different varieties to me, maybe different fungicides, but ultimately we're on the same soil and we've had the same weather. It's the drones just turned.
Man kan ikke sammenligne det her direkte med naboen, han kan dyrke noget andet, men altså i den tørre juni 2018 ser det fornuftigt ud. Der er stadigvæk vand til Clives hvede, hvor naboen det begynder at se træls ud. Og så overskriften kan være resiliens. Og det snakker meget om på engelsk, og jeg aner ikke, hvad det her på dansk. Og det er fordi vi ikke rigtig arbejder med det. Hvad er den her bæredygtighed i jorden? Mere holdbar. Robusthed.
Okay, so the principles to take away from this that I farm by now. I always try to have something growing on the ground. I see my fields like the whole farm like a huge solar panel. If I want to capture as much sunlight as possible, I need it to be green for as much as I can. In August and September, they're my best productive days, the longest days, the highest, the strongest sun. Why would I have bare stubble fields through that period? So trying to keep things green as much as possible.
Skal også ikke gro hele tiden, også juli og august, hvor der er masser af sol og ikke rigtig noget, der gror på hvedemarkerne.
No bare soil, so keeping that soil covered, that reduces evaporation, transpiration from the ground, reducing water loss again.
Jeg tror, jeg har også sat den.
Yeah, so the second. That one. And then maximum diversity, so as diverse a rotation as possible. I'll come on to it later. We've got some companion crops, so we're growing 2 crops together. Cover crops with as much diversity as possible. I believe that same with humans, it's for soil. A varied diet is a healthy diet. We can get fat eating burgers every single day, but it's not a very healthy way of keeping yourself in good shape. By having as much different species, it builds as much different types of biology, so we end up with no one type of biology in the soil dominating. We end up with a healthy, balanced mix, like a balanced diet for people.
I går der sagde han, vi skal føde jorden, ligesom vi føder vores børn. Vi skal ikke bare få sukker og burger i dem. Så diversitet, ligesom det er sundt for os, men diversitet i diæten, så er det også for jorden.
So to minimise the soil disturbance, obviously, allow that biology that's in the soil to build strong networks. A great analogy I heard of this was, imagine a big city like London, and all the people in London have worked out how to work really efficiently. They've built their tube network, their airports, their trains, their cafes, their offices. They've built all these, and they can all work efficiently and do what they need to do. If you turned London upside down, ploughed it, or blew it up with a big bomb, not much work would get done there for the next 12 months. It would spend all its time having to rebuild those networks. So why do we do that when we cultivate soil? Why do we let it just start to build networks and start to work efficiently, and then tip it on its head and make it start all over again and start building again? So that's the point of the minimal disturbance. Let those networks build.
Der er mange flere mikroorganismer i jorden, der er inde ved en bygger i London, og hvis vi lige vendte London rundt på hovedet, så kan jeg tænke, at netværker, det er nok specielt svampene, som vi kommer mere ind på, at der er netværk i jorden.
This was the other kind of thing I realised, that you are a livestock farmer, even if you don't have cows or sheep or pigs. There is an abundant amount of livestock in the soil below our feet. I heard an interesting fact the other day that if you took the entire weight of soil biota in a hectare of soil to a metre deep, it would weigh the same as 100 sheep per hectare. That's a lot of living organisms below your feet. Now, if you don't feed sheep, they die. It's the same for those guys down there. So we have to return organic matter and feed them if we want them to thrive and therefore feed our plants.
Levende organismer ned til 1 meters dybde, det svarer til 100 får, og de skal holdes i live også hele sæsonen.
And getting so leaving that soil alone and getting roots and plants growing, nothing fixes soil better than a plant. No subsoiler or machine that I've ever come across can improve soil. If you can get roots growing into soil, and there's this hashtag on Twitter, this roots not iron, which I think is a really good one, because using roots rather than steel, which costs a lot more money, to kind of fix these problems. Cultivation often just creates the need for more cultivation. It doesn't really fix the problem, it just kicks the can down the road a little bit.
Ja, det står ikke direkte, men altså, der er ikke noget, der reparerer jorden bedre end planterødder i forhold til maskiner.
So that's the principles behind it. So a bit more detail about how we actually farm and some of the things we do. So I'll talk about the kind of agronomy side of it first, the nutrition, rotations, and how we deal with problems like slugs and that kind of thing. So nutrition to start with. Carbon-nitrogen ratios are really important to understand where in a conservation agriculture system. It's different to kind of a cultivated agriculture. By loading more organic matter into soil surface, it needs nitrogen to break that down. So if you don't anticipate that in the early years of changing to conservation agriculture, your yields will drop. And there's this 3-year yield drop that people talk about, and that's what's going on. They've not paid enough respect and detailed attention to their carbon-nitrogen ratios. Sometimes it's a case of slightly more nitrogen in those early years to make things work. Other times it's just down to different timings. So seedbed nitrogen, the drills that we use all have the ability to apply seedbed nitrogen where we need to. Or sometimes using nitrogen a little bit earlier with our timings in the spring than we would have been if we cultivated. So sometimes it's just about timing.
Det udvidelse af, man kan se, nogen kan se ved omlægning til no-till. skyldes meget ofte mangel på kvælstof. Når vi begynder at få mere organisk stof ned i jorden, man har et højt CN-forhold, og det er specielt halm, jamen så skal der kvælstof til for at få det opsat, ellers så mangler afgrøden simpelthen gødning. Indtil der kommer gang i det. Jeg ved ikke, om han har sagt, det er nogle af mineralerne. Det er jordlevning, de kan, mikroorganismer og bakterier kan hente, specielt svamle kan hente af alle mineralerne. Der er masser af jord, det man siger det.
So that biology, those networks I talked about, what are they doing for us? Well, they are the key through fungi like mycorrhizae to accessing the abundant mineral nutrition which is in all of our soils. So if we can get those networks built and functioning correctly like they should be doing, our need for soluble nutrition from bags and bottles, our P, our K, our calciums, all of that can be accessed from the soil. But you need to create the mechanism that lets the plant get hold of them. The plant on its own can't access them. It needs that symbiotic relationship with that biology in the soil. So once that builds, you start to make savings in inputs because we don't need those synthetic inputs anymore.
Så planterne kan ikke selv hente de her næringsstoffer, der er bundet i mineralerne, i sand og i mineralske partikler. Men det kan mikroorganismerne. Og når du får dem til at fungere, så kan du spare på input af gødning.
I won't speak in detail about slugs because you can do a whole talk about slugs in themselves, but a lot of people worry about slugs with all that extra organic matter. But just like in any farming system, if you know your enemy and understand them and the things that they don't like, they can be overcome. We use less slug pellets today than we used to under cultivation. Significantly, we've used, I think, over 2 or 3 bags this autumn on several thousand acres of wheat. We were buying them by the lorry load 15 years ago, so we're definitely using less from that point of view. Rotation and diversity, I think, is probably the biggest single part of that. If you grow crops that slugs like rape, over and over and over, so in England, wheat rape was quite a common farming practice. Well, that resulted in huge numbers of slugs, which meant that you couldn't grow wheat or rape anymore. So get the rotation back in and get that balance back in, and those problems aren't such big problems.
Forstå snegle, hvorfor den gør, som den gør. En af det, han bruger mindre sneglebælge, end han har gjort tidligere. Det største problem, og det er sædskifte. Ingen af dem er meget kendt med raps, enten med anden eller tredje år. Planting green, you'll come back to planting green.
And the IPM.
Det her med at stå grønt, mener han faktisk også en af dem, der er de vigtige, som vi måske ikke har tænkt på før. At så spiser de det grønne i stedet for det gamle grønne, der står på markedet.
Yeah, so the IPM, integrated pest management, is a big thing in the UK now, considering that when we use insecticides for other problems that maybe we're actually hurting some of the species that are beneficial to us. So when you're trying to take out that aphid with an insecticide, you may be killing a beetle that likes to eat slug eggs, for instance. So understanding that the chemicals aren't all good, there's often a bad side to them, as well as they fix one problem but make you several others sometimes. So we need to kind of be more aware of that. The drilling on the green line there, timing, that's about what I've learned with slugs have become habitual creatures. If they are munching away on your cover crop or your volunteer rate plants and you plant wheat into that field, they won't instantly go for the wheat. They'll carry on doing what they're doing. They're happily eating a cover crop or happily eating a volunteer oilseed rape plant. If you get the timing, if you've got a big problem, and you can be clever with timing, so perhaps drill late, glyphosate after drilling, so the cover crop is there for as long as possible. Let the slugs keep happily eating away on that because they're leaving your wheat alone. And if the timing's right, you could get that just right so it's starting to get cold and frosty in mid-November, and then as the cover crop disappears and the wheat's coming through, the slugs disappear because they go down away from the frosts and the colder weather. So timing can be really your friend if you think it through and understand their habits.
Så kan man være heldig eller dygtig til, at han har inden grønt til at vokse, så kan man godt have stejlene travlt beskæftiget der, så de kan hoppe over på veden, før den er godt i gang. Jeg ved ikke, om han nævner det, men han snakker om i går, det var også det med bejsningssovs, det gør han ikke, det igen for at få de her kemikalier væk. Vi tror, at vi bare målretter kemikalier mod et enkelt skadedyr, men det er lidt naivt. Der er meget ofte meget andet, der går med i spil, alle de gode dyr og ryger med.
So I'll move on because time is going to limit a little bit today. But my rotation, I don't really have a fixed rotation. I refer to it as opportunistic. And that's opportunistic in terms of what the market might want this year. So if there's a particularly good contract on millet, for instance, or peas, I'll take advantage of that. If there's not, they may be missing from my cropping that year. But also on what that block of land needs. So if I'm trying to get on top of a grassweed problem on a block of land, then it's a great time to use something like linseed or millet, which are very late sown, so I've got good chances to get good hits of glyphosate in the spring. So it helps me. So the principles behind it, though, are I grow 50% of my area is first wheat, milling wheat, as high value as I can. A smaller area of oilseed rape, but just 5% or so now. Some potentially goes into winter beans, but generally speaking, 35-40% of my land is in one of these spring break crops, which is providing my entry for my winter, my first wheats, and also giving me an opportunity to grow an overwinter cover crop to build my organic matters and my soil biology. So all of those spring crops will be preceded by a good multi-species cover crop.
Så halvdelen i brødhvede, det er det, der er flest penge i. Og så det andet, det er hvad markedet forlanger. Altså specielle problemer, så kan man gå ind og tage nogle afgrøder, der bliver så sent, som hirse og spændende afgrøder, sikkert. Og det her med en stor del efter, fortsat betyder selvfølgelig gode muligheder for mellemafgrøder, efterafgrøder, dækafgrøder.
So move on from that to the organic matter, the carbon and the soil organic matter building. So any carbon that I can get from anywhere into my soil is ultimately going to turn into carbon that I can sell. So cover crops are obviously a big part of that, and I just mentioned that all of those spring crops, we grow an overwinter cover crop which will establish as fast as possible, as tight behind the combine as possible, usually on the same day of harvest. Sometimes ahead, we sometimes broadcast them into standing crops. We're a bit further south obviously than you, so your time is more limited, so techniques like broadcasting them a week or two before harvest into the standing crop may be more relevant to you to get enough growth before winter sets in. I tend to keep them cheap, generally speaking. I use a lot of, because we grow a lot of different crops on the farm, we use some of those as in our cover crop mixes. But then we buy things like sunflowers or phacelia or some forage maize in cheaply, but try and keep the overall cost at a reasonable level, because cover crops are investment in the future. You won't see a return on them next year or maybe even the year after. So as much as I'd like to spend loads more on my cover crops and have lots of exotic species in them, I can only afford to invest in my soil at a certain rate. I see it as like a bank account where every time I take a crop off, I'm making a withdrawal. Every time I put a cover crop or some organic matter in, I'm making a deposit. So the two things have to match to some extent.
Så efterafgrøder, det er en investering i fremtiden, og det er at putte penge i banken, i jordbanken. Og det er ret ikke putte alt for mange penge i banken, hvis man gør det lidt billigere, så derfor så dyrker han en stor del af hans efterafgrøder selv. FSS, det dyrker selv.
You don't have to grow one cash crop at a time. We're all used to monocultures of field of wheat, field of rape, field of peas. We grow a couple of companion crops. So one of my favourites is pionererne, which is spring peas and spring rape mixed together. It works really well because peas are a good crop for us, but a nightmare to harvest. They go flat and they're slow to harvest. If you drill them with spring rape, the rape creates like an architecture to the crop, like garden canes. So it keeps the peas standing and makes for fast harvesting. We get the same yield of peas that we would have got if we grew peas as a monoculture, but we also get a bonus of about 300 kilos an acre or so of spring rape. So we're getting 1.25 times output from our land in that year. We've also found we don't seem to need fungicides when we do this. It's like there's some kind of interaction between the peas and the rape by having multiple species that disease is less of a problem. So we've never yet had to use a fungicide in a piola crop, whereas when we just grow peas, it normally needs a fungicide.
Så dyrkning af vore ærter og vorraps er en fremragende kombination på gården. Dyrke sammen udbytte i ærterne, og så får man et lille ton raps med gratis i købet. Med i købet. Knap mindre fungicider, der er svampene, det er forkert at vi får videre. Der er mindre svampeangreb.
Another one we grow is, I'll have to move on for time, but we grow spring oats and spring beans together. They're another good example of a cover crop.
Hav og bønner, også for os udlagt.
Livestock. I'm not a livestock farmer, although I grew up on a little dairy farm. I know nothing about cows or sheep at all. But we've managed to partner with sheep farmers in different areas where they have a need over winter for winter fodder. We've got all these cover crops. I've got labour available, my tractor drivers available to...
muligt kulstof ind i systemet.
So the mechanical changes, the machinery that we use to achieve this. Really, when I first started this, there wasn't so much choice. There's now a vast amount of choice. There's lots of really good different manufacturers make lots of good drills, and they've all got pros and cons, and people like one make over another or whatever. Back when we started, there was less choice, so I had to modify some of the machinery ourselves. But really, the key is they all have one thing in common. It's about creating minimal disturbance. We use a disc drill and a time drill. The advantages of the disc drill is it can drill into these big, tall cover crops like you saw in that earlier video. A time drill can't do that, it will just drag them and get into a mess. However, a disc drill in a chopped straw crop, like say wheat after oats, can hairpin and that can cause various agronomic problems. That's where a time drill can be better, a low disturbance time drill. So we use both. Our disc drill is the main drill, but there's a place for a time drill, and particularly this year, the time drills will be very good in the very wet autumn where a disc can smear. So they've got their pros and cons. The ideal world is have both a time and a disc. If I had to have one, it would be the disc, I think, because it's the most versatile.
Han har altid haft, eller lang tid hvor jeg har haft en skiveskærsmaskine og en tandskærsmaskine, og skiveskæren den har sin force oppe i toppen med de kraftige efterafgrøder og halmen, der skal lige rådes lidt til side af det tandskærsmaskinen.
So our disc drill now, for years we used John Deere 750As that we'd modified, added fertiliser to and various other things. We now use a Horsch Avatar, a 12-metre version, which completes our control traffic. We operate a 1236 control traffic to keep the wheelings and any compaction that we may get in known locations. It's a versatile drill, it's got 4 hoppers, but as I say, there are loads of really good drills from lots of different manufacturers now. The other drill, you want to mention that?
En fleksibel såmaskine, 12 meter, der passer ind i CCF, med 4 tanke, så der er 4 ting, der kan spredes ud, og så er der 2 små tanker også.
That should play. So this is our other drill. So we bought a Horsch CO from Poland 7 years or so ago now. It cost €4,500. Modified it to a low disturbance point, so we took the duet coulters off and put like a very low disturbance, 12mm, very low disturbance point onto it. This year we started using it when it's been so wet, we used it with a front hopper on the tractor, and that was wheat going in mid-December into chopped oat stubble. Much more disturbance than I like normally. I don't like to see that much soil disturbance, but in the UK this autumn it's been tragically wet, and just getting crops into the ground and growing has been a result in itself. So most of my neighbours have drilled nothing, and we have been able to 100% drill the whole farm. So it kind of proves you don't need to spend fortunes. That whole drill's cost us £10,000 or so to do. You don't need to go out and buy new stuff all the time. That's the modifications to the points, this very simple knife coulter, and before the front hopper you see it had the seed cart for seeding for the weed.
Han ville have brugt disciplin, men der var meget få lande, der var meget lidt hvede, der blev så i efteråret, så bare det han kunne få noget i der i december, det kunne han ikke lade sig gøre med den anden, så det er en fleksibel maskine, sådan en tandsåmaskine, der kan løse mange svære problemer.
So has all this worked for us? Is it successful? So how do we define that? So first thing is, does it work? Can we grow crops? Well, yeah. If I move that on, is that not playing yet? So this was back in, I think, 2008, one of our, when we were running the 750As. This was drilling wheat into rape stubble. So rape cut in late July, a cover crop established, and then the wheat going in November. So we've grown this cover crop and captured that carbon between the 2 crops. So all that extra carbon we're catching there. And that was the crop being drilled. And a lot of people at that time were like, well, that's not going to grow. How can that possibly grow? How will that work? This is the day of drilling. So it was glyphosated a week after drilling, and the wheat's just starting to emerge there. It's hard to see in there. That's by about Christmas. Just starting to see it 4 rows. That's a bit of the headland of that same field. and that was March before the first fertiliser application. So about this time of year, at the time, and that's it as we're coming to harvest. It just ends up looking like a perfectly normal crop of wheat. So does the system work? Yes.
Naboen sagde, at det her ikke kunne lade sig gøre. Såningen er ved i november i sådan en kraftig efterafgrøde. Og det viser sig, som vi kunne se på billederne, at det kunne det godt, og glyfosatsprøjten, det var en uge efter såningen.
Yeah. So the other thing that we all use as farmers to measure our success is yield. And I've already kind of touched on this. It's not cost us yield. We're growing the same or slightly better yields than we were 10 years ago. So yeah, it yields. It's what most farmers judge how successful everyone's being at things. Same with Allstate. Similar story. Same or slightly better yields over that period of time. So it's not costing us yield. The financial performance. Obviously, that's the important bit. We're all running businesses. We're all in business, and that's what pays the bills at the end of the day. And how's that? So I mentioned earlier, I set myself this £200 a hectare fixed cost structure. That's how it breaks down. This is, I'm working on one labour unit per every 800 hectares that we farm, one tractor, a relatively small tractor compared to what we were using. I understand 240 horsepower is small, but it's small compared to what we were doing. One tractor per every 800 hectares as well. Our establishment costs are around the £25 a hectare, so that's the cost of our drills and associated in running them. Harvest, similar to most farms really, it's one combine to about 2,500 acres. And our fuel costs, £20 a hectare, obviously significantly less because we're doing less, but it's basically a 65 to 75% reduction over where we were. And that's the saving that is making me more profitable and being able to farm without being so reliant on subsidies.
Så det var målsætningen for det, hvor I var før i procentsatser, I kan se. Og det er specielt måske det der med en traktor af mellemstørrelse og en mand til 800 hektar. Det dobbler han så op til 1800 hektar og 1800 hektar.
So to see the effect of those fixed costs and what they do, I compared, in this table, it shows some figures that were published in the UK back in 2018 from the world record crop of rate of 6.7 tonnes a hectare that was grown, but at huge cost. It was using a lot of variable costs, £700 a hectare, giving a good gross margin still of 1,300, better than my gross margin, even my very small variable cost spend. The high yielding crop still beats my farming in terms of gross margin. But to achieve that kind of high yielding crop, you need a higher fixed cost structure. £400 a hectare was the farmer that his figures that he said his fixed costs were there, which is pretty good. That's pretty good in UK terms. But when you reduce them to 200, it changes things. So all of a sudden, even though he's got a better gross margin, my profit is on average nearly 20% better. And that's comparing me to a world record crop now by a brilliant farmer in the UK on a fantastic soil, the best farm in the UK, or best in the world, technically speaking. So I didn't think that was fair. And I've done a comparison here between our raw seed rate yield average and best back 10 years ago versus today. And this is where it really starts to look interesting, where we are on average 425% more profitable than we were. So it shows that whole thing of profit is sanity, turnover is vanity. It's just the same. We have to stop focusing on gross margin and start focusing on actual net margin profits of these individual crops. So financially, it's been very successful for me. So is it sustainable? Am I just mining my soil? So am I just running things down and the land that I farm will there be nothing left for my children? Well, I'd like to think the opposite is true. We've been testing the farm over the whole time that we've changed the system, and we've seen no depletion of soil indices. So all of those P and K indices, despite us not only using compost and manures and not bringing any TSP or MOP type products in, they are maintained or improved in a lot of cases. So we're certainly not mining those basic minerals. Organic matter is increasing. We've gone from an average of about 4% across the farm to an average of around 6%. Seems to be increasing by about 0.2% a year, which is a nice increase. Whether I can keep that up long term, but it means that we're getting a 1% increase every 5 or 6 years, which is a good rate to be increasing at. Whether that can continue to rise or whether it hits a ceiling, I don't know. The water infiltration is better. The land has coped this winter far better with this extreme weather. Where we've got neighbours with washed away, rilled and gullied soils, ours has stayed stable, our drains run clean, and we now use things like trail sprayers rather than self-propelled sprayers we used to, because the ground carries equipment so much better. And we've reduced our input use. We're not using, we don't use no insecticides for 8 years now, and we're using, let's say, less of those artificial fertilisers. We're still using artificial nitrogen, but less of the P and the K type stuff. Grass weeds has also reduced. We had quite a lot of blackgrass, quite a lot of brome on the farm. I don't think this is down to conservation agriculture individually, it's more down to the better rotation. More spring crops is the way to deal with grass weeds, it seems. So.
Altså vi tager her som et stort problem i England, så er det også blevet mindre. Og mest på grund af sædskifte. En besparelse, som vi havde for det foregående slides, det var det her med at binde alle de her kapital i de her store traktorer og af det hele taget. Det er ofte ikke med i økonomiske opgørelser. Infiltrationen har blandt andet med, at hans bedre bæredygtighed for jorden, bæreevne for jorden, betyder, at han har skiftet de her selvkørende sprøjter ud, der kan køre overalt med trailersprøjter. Det er også en besparelse.
But the best measurement is looking at soil, what our grandfathers did. Digging holes, smelling it, looking for worms. You know, a good farmer should know what a healthy soil looks like. We shouldn't need to send samples to the laboratory. It should have that colour of a nice darker chocolatey colour. It should be full of worms, beetles, all sorts of life. It should smell right. It should have that fresh aerobic smell. There's some research done recently that said that found that in the presence of the smell of a healthy soil, there's a hormone a smell that actually it's encoded into our DNA. And it lowered, they monitored humans and our blood pressure lowered, our heart rates dropped, so we know, it's inbuilt into us, we know what a healthy soil's like, and it goes probably way back to our great ancestors that knew where to set up their farms. They knew that's a good soil to grow stuff here, so a farmer should know this. We shouldn't have to rely on technology and labs to tell us everything. Science could only explain parts of this. We still have to think for ourselves.
Laboratoriet ikke bestemt det hele. Det er ikke kun dig, Jørgen, der stikker næsen ned i jorden. Du har en kollega her også, og han forklarer det her med en gammel historie, at man har lavet forsøg med, at sund jord kan faktisk gøre en sundere mål med lavere blodtryk. Så man kan også en anekdote, den er sikkert rigtigt. Og forskerne kan ikke det hele. Vi skal ud og have fingrene i og styr på det selv.
So to sum this up, does it work? Yeah, it ticks all those boxes for me, and it's been very successful. It's transformed my business into one that now is independent of ag subsidies. I think in the UK, things with us leaving Europe, things are changing quite rapidly. What the future holds is uncertain, but if we lost subsidies altogether, I'm running a farm business that is still sustainable, and I think that's a rare thing in the UK right now, unless people start to change more.
Flueben med alle hans checkpunkter.
And just to finish off, an apology really. This is a picture of my grandfather, and everything I've told you today, I'm talking about it like it's all something new, and like it's the latest, greatest new technique in agriculture. But I reckon if this guy was still alive, he would know all of these things and probably be stood at the back of the room nodding his head and saying, well, that's all a bit obvious, isn't it? So maybe we need to start thinking back a little bit rather than just forward into what did the farmers that had to farm before us, without being able to grab that synthetic nitrogen or that kind of glyphosate, how did they do it? How did they solve those problems? Because they did farm like that, so it is possible. So that finishes off, if I've not gone on and taken too much time, so thank you very much. Just mention briefly, I'm a big believer in farmer-to-farmer knowledge transfer, so groups like this are absolutely essential for us to be able to kind of change and learn from each other and succeed. As well as the farm, I run a website called the Farming Forum that some of you may have come across. It's very popular in the UK, a very big website, and that's just farmer-to-farmer communication, not just on conservation agriculture, it's anything that farmers want to talk about. We also publish a magazine called Direkte, which if you haven't signed up for it and you can read English, you should. So thank you very much, and I hope that was excellent.